So for anyone watching, thank you and welcome to Charles. We met at a dinner organised by a mutual connection, and I guess we kind of didn't shut up talking that whole time. So I think this is quite a good kind of next catch up. So for everyone that doesn't know who you are, would you mind giving a quick little intro?
Yes, great. Well, good to be having this conversation following on from the dinner. There was no seating plan, so it was calmer that we were having that conversation.
For our
Um,
sins.
exactly. So my day job is as a lawyer in one of the big international law firms, and I cover deep tech as an industry area that includes crypto, it includes AI, it includes fintech, and my background is corporate finance, and I have some technical background. So I've worked in AI for about 15 years, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot about AI because AI is amazing. What a way to start.
Again, I think quite non-controversial
Yes.
for current views. Um, but yeah, and I guess you mentioned deep tech, but also just looking at your CV in general, you've got such like you're at such an intersection of different things that you do, including venture and crypto and AI and digital assets and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like you're quite uniquely positioned to see problems from, I suppose, very different angles. And I guess in prep for our conversation today, have been watching you on YouTube videos. Hope you don't mind.
Mm.
um, don't be nervous. It's fine. And one of the videos that I saw was actually where you were discussing your role for RAC DAO or RAC Innovation City. As it's now been rebranded, I believe. Are you still quite close to that work?
Yeah, I sure am. So I finished my term, and that was an extremely interesting and exciting role. So Ragdow, for anyone who doesn't know, and as Anastasia says, it's had some rebrand, um, is a regulator in one of the Emirates in UAE, and it is a Web3 focused regulator. So it is trying to support that ecosystem. And I guess that's a good way of responding to your point about what interests me. Um, my background is corporate finance, and I guess I'm looking at these experiments through the lens of corporate finance because money is a signal. So if you're building a business but no one wants to be a customer, that tells you something about it. And I think um, it was what was one of the most interesting things about crypto originally, that you know immediately these are liquid assets, the tokens, and they're tradable, they're globally tradable. We leave aside regulation for a moment. Certainly in the early days, this was almost entirely unregulated. And you got the feedback in real time for what you were building, whether there was community support for it, whether it had utility or usefulness, whether people thought that there was value in it. And of course, Bitcoin famously was supposed to be a peer-to-peer payment system. So the more successful it became as an investment, actually the bigger failure it is on its own terms. It's not supposed to be valuable like this and have people just sticking it in cold wallets. You're supposed to be paying for pizzas with it. So yeah, I love the experiments, and I'm working a lot in business and investment now, but my background and my day job is as a lawyer, and so there's an interesting question there of, can law and regulation accommodate these new things? Famously with crypto assets, could they be property under English law? Sounds a bit esoteric, but it can't be a financial product if it's not property, and you wouldn't be able to use legal remedies to recover crypto assets from people because the remedies assume that things that you're trying to recover um, or do commercial transactions with are property and recognized by the system. So we had to think about those questions, and they're fascinating because we didn't have to think about what counts as property for 500 years. And I'm not 500 years old, so I missed it the first time round when we were doing
You don't
horses and
look a
carts
day
and
over
contracts.
499.
Exactly. And then we have the question about regulation, which is what you are permitted to do jurisdiction by jurisdiction. And that is a hard question for something like crypto because it's new and untested. So financial regulators like investments to be safe. This is not safe by definition. It's an experiment. So it's extremely hard for regulators to figure out how to not just tell people they can't do something if they want to, but somehow ensure that they're kept safe or educated in a way that they can keep themselves safe.
And I guess you've kind of shifted straight into the regulatory bit, which I obviously love. That's my area of passion, I suppose. But I guess crypto is certainly in the UK. We're looking at all the newer consultation papers, and we're looking at a more robust regulatory framework and environment. Whereas there are other jurisdictions that are perhaps a little bit more willing to experiment and explore. So, from a jurisdictional perspective, kind of I'd love to hear your view about what that looks like. And certainly, again, another one of the things that you mentioned in one of your other interviews is when you're setting up or looking to assist a company setting up, you're looking at a jurisdiction's legal certainty. So I'd love to explore a little bit about what legal certainty means in practice and what different jurisdictions, I suppose, do well versus don't. Is there a trade-off between legal certainty and the ability to innovate and experiment?
Oh gosh, that's a big question. I'll start with legal certainty and then do the UK as a
Yeah,
jurisdiction.
I feel like
So,
I just asked you about 10 questions. Just too
well,
enthusiastic.
the first one relates to what was in my mind when I was answering your question before. So I guess I was describing it there from the perspective of you must have legal certainty, and it would be a bit weird for a lawyer to say anything other than that. But it is possible to do this without there being legal certainty. So in the early days of crypto, none of these questions had been addressed. They certainly hadn't been answered. The question of whether Bitcoin would be recognized by English courts if it was stolen, for example, or there was a breach of contract in relation to an agreement concerning Bitcoin. So in those circumstances, we didn't have the answers to the question, can crypto assets be property under English law? But it didn't stop people messing around with it, buying it, selling it. So actually, I would say that the answer was delivered to the lawyers, and the lawyers had to figure out how to work inside that, because we would have looked a bit strange if criminal lawyers were in court in relation to a case where someone had stolen Bitcoin, and the basis of theft under English law is depriving someone of property. So if the criminal would stand up and say, "Well, I did steal the Bitcoin, but it's not property. So under the legislation, I haven't deprived anyone of their property because this isn't that. I took it, but I didn't take property," we'd look a bit daft. And then in relation to contracts, this is, even at that stage, hundreds of billions of dollar markets where people were buying it and selling it. They were trading it like it was goods. So again, if the law is looking at that in the abstract and saying, well, this isn't something that has value according to the law, we're out of sync with what people are doing in practice. And the law should be supporting commercial transactions. There isn't a public policy in relation to commercial transactions beyond generally supporting commerce. So that, I think, is the question around legal certainty, that from a lawyer's perspective, we were kind of, we had to get to the answer that crypto was property, but it wasn't stopping the crypto people from working with it. None of the people that I grew up with in crypto would stop me and say, look, I am not going to mine Bitcoin, or I'm not going to buy Bitcoin unless you can tell me that it would be recognized as property somehow under English law. Nobody thought that. It just operated. And people worked with smart contracts. And smart contracts can be recognized as contracts under English law if they meet the characteristics that are required of a contract under English law, that there's a bargain, that there are two parties, that they've got an intention to have a legally binding relationship, that they've got terms that they both understand. So you can have a smart contract that's also a contract from a legal perspective, but not all smart contracts meet those criteria, and often they're just kind of transferring and trading direct. So it was fascinating to me that this huge engaged market had developed without legal certainty. And I think then coming back to your point about the importance of it is probably, here we are in 2026, and mainstream financial institutions are dealing with crypto assets. So at that point, it has to be legally certain. But that really is not a creature of, it's not a function of what the crypto community was required to do. It's a function of crypto being adopted by mainstream finance. And then I'll pick up on the point around regulation in the UK. So as you say, for most of its time, crypto was largely unregulated in the UK. We had a few years ago rules around money laundering. And then a few years later, rules around marketing of crypto assets. But we never treated crypto assets as investments in the way that we did other financial products. And that's the bit that, as you say, is changing now. We are near the end of the consultations. And I think, as you and I have discussed a lot, that the outcome of the policy is clear. So we're going to bring crypto assets inside the regulatory perimeter, what the regulators call their perimeter. So they will supervise crypto assets and firms dealing in crypto assets the same way as they do other financial products. And in that context, the UK has done what the UK does. So the UK is a high standard financial regulator, globally recognized as having high standards in doing things properly. So the hard practical thing now is for people who've got crypto exchange and related business models have got 12, 18 months to look more like a bank than a crypto exchange. So you'd be expected to have high standards.
How challenging is that? What are the key differences? Because I think I've heard about this, a lot. Like, you've got to kind of fit a crypto framework into a traditional banking framework, and it's like, how does that actually work in practice? And what are the main challenges that you've seen when you're assisting firms with trying to comply with a kind of traditional financial services model in a more innovative space? And also, do you think that we have the regulation almost a little bit too late in the innovation cycle? Kind of both questions that sit together. Because now you're trying to stuff something in when things have already happened.
Yeah, I think it's challenging in lots of ways. So it's challenging in the sense that the firms will be subject to lots more rules. So we're now getting in all the rules that are familiar from traditional finance around ensuring there's no market abuse, ensuring that there are disclosures in relation to the crypto assets so that customers understand what they're getting. That's all normal stuff and legitimate. I guess we didn't have it in crypto because the expectation was that people in crypto were engaging with the projects themselves, that these were community projects. If you held tokens, you were part of the community. You, in the very early days, you would have been a developer. You would have been creating and minting and mining the tokens. And even in the later days, people who are engaging with crypto projects should really not just be buying some of the tokens. They should be part of the ecosystem. They should be understanding what's going on. making decisions to the extent that they're holding governance tokens and having a relationship with the project. And here I'm describing the decentralized business models where the projects are community run.
Mm-hmm.
They're operated and owned by the community makes decisions, and those by and large live outside regulation because you're not dealing with an intermediary who sells you something that looks like a product. So I think the more we have these type of banking and investment rules applied to crypto, to me, the more we're sort of pulling it away from, we're making an assumption that it isn't what, to my mind, crypto always was, which was this kind of joint enterprise with communities building and figuring things out together. But of course, it is now. It goes up and down, like whatever we are, $3 trillion market cap, and people buy Bitcoin in traditionally wrapped investment products. So they are accessing it like they're accessing equity and bonds. So obviously, from a regulator's perspective, we're not in the world that I'm describing of everybody engaging together in the projects. People are buying things in the expectation that they will increase in value, or there will be some return that they get from it. So everything that banks do around keeping customers safe and informed and keeping the system safe is now applied to crypto, and that means more rules, and the rules are just the top line of this. Underneath the rules you have policies. So for every rule around, say, market abuse, that people shouldn't be trading on inside information or front running the customers' trades or things like that, you have a policy, because that generic rule needs to be applied at a granular level. And for the policies, you have kind of operationalization of the policy. So for every rule, it's not just there's something that we need to comply with. Every rule is essentially a little business department who've got to have policies and people and the ability to ensure both compliance and evidence of compliance. So it's a massive shift. And I think the challenges then are, one, there's a lot more to do. Two, it's obviously extremely expensive to do 20 times the number of things that you were doing originally. And then I think one of the hard parts for the crypto native firms is banks know what the rules are, but they've kind of internalized the rules. If you spent decades with this institutional memory of facing regulators and being supervised and reporting, you just know what they expect. And that, I think, is the hard shift for the crypto industry. In the UK specifically, we're talking about it because we've got new rules, but I think wherever it goes inside the mainstream financial system, if you're a bank or something like a big financial firm, you just know in your bones what the regulators expect. And the crypto firms have come from this very different context that I was talking about before, where everyone is kind of figuring things out together. And I think a lot of the fun in the crypto native stuff is when things went wrong, you learned more from the things going wrong. So you would go off and fix it, and it was less high stakes. There was less value in it. So people were deliberately just pushing things and trying things and testing things because you were fine with it failing. It's a bit like when Elon Musk describes that sending up a rocket and exploding, you get as much data from that as you do from a successful launch. And that was crypto, but it's obviously completely inconsistent with financial regulator thinking to say, well, this is an experiment and things might go wrong, and that will be terrific because we'll all know so much more once things have gone wrong. You just can't say that to a regulator. So it's cultural, it's financial, it's all those things. And maybe final point on that. I think sometimes regulators assume that crypto firms make more money from, say, retail customers than they do. You don't make so much money from doing crypto business with UK retail that it would be economic to spend vast amounts of money on compliance. So I think it will shrink down the ecosystem in the UK, the compliance with the new rules.
Interesting. And I heard someone actually say the other day, again on a different podcast episode I was doing, that actually his belief was that we were a bit slow to regulate crypto. But I actually think, and maybe maybe I'm giving regulators too much credit here, but I think we needed to see what was going wrong in the first place in order to kind of make regulation that fits maybe a little bit better. I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that it's necessarily what the end product will be, but regulators are always shifting rules, like, and now more so than ever, and at a quicker pace of deployment and change than ever. So I feel like hopefully maybe this is phase one, but with time there will be more kind of specific crypto crypto native rules that kind of fit in between traditional and what the crypto innovators kind of expect. But I suppose on a slightly different point, do you think it's kind of inevitable that we utilize this technology in traditional banking? Is that where we're headed?
It was so I got into crypto for two reasons. One was what I've been talking about, that I just loved the experiment. I loved the thing and thought the people were amazing.
And maybe that's why you and I connect, because I'm a
yeah,
chemist by trade, I
exactly. Yeah.
suppose. So we're both into experiments.
Lots of engineers, lots of super bright people who are just trying to figure things out. But I also assumed that this was going to be a kind of IT uplift for the traditional financial system, and I was working in that at the time. So I thought, well, this is interesting, and I'll also get to see how what I do during the day is going to develop, and that should make me well positioned for when it starts happening. I'd be able to say, well, I've seen this in the experimental form, and here it is now in the traditional markets. Well, that then didn't happen because this was 10 years ago. And so I went for years thinking, well, I thought the banks and financial infrastructure systems and asset managers, I thought that they would be adopting this, and it hasn't really happened. But that's fine because I've got all this cool new work and stuff that I'm doing for all of the crypto companies. But now it is happening. And it does seem we spent a long time sort of responding to those points where people would describe blockchain as a solution looking for a problem, and that was generally in the context of it doesn't make the traditional financial infrastructure better. And I think I'm not sufficiently expert to judge that, but it now looks like it is being adopted. What I could see was just some obvious things, like if you had a single source of truth, if you had a kind of multi-party transaction, which is often what financial markets look like, and certainly some types of financial products like in supply chain finance, it's obviously more efficient for people to be working off one record than everyone to have their own records. And then by definition, they have to do reconciliation, and the reconciliation reveals discrepancies. And then we go back around with hundreds of emails and people trying to figure out where the discrepancy is. But I wasn't in a position to say confidently that the trade-offs would mean that we would get to that stage from where we are, and banks are pretty conservative, and financial regulators are naturally concerned, number one, with systemic risk. So no matter what potential improvements you've got, you can't be risking that the whole system breaks while you see if they're going to be better. So to jump to where we are now, I'm pleased and excited that it does look like blockchains and similar technologies can provide some kind of IT upgrade. All the financial systems is just sending information back and forth. We don't use anything physical anymore in transactions. So we're just sending messages, and the blockchains are a good way of sending secure, verifiable, transparent to the extent that that's permissible messages. So it's a better kind of information messaging system, and then it leads to interesting developments um, with things that don't work. So one of the examples that I've been working on, and we in the team over the last year or so, transparency is a good thing in relation to things like fighting financial crime and similar, but a less good thing if you're two banks that are using blockchains to transfer funds, because although the wallets are pseudonymized, people get to figure out whose wallet is what. And seeing that Bank A has transferred to Bank B a certain amount of dollars is, well, A, a commercial problem, but B, would be a breach of the Bank Secrecy Act in the US. So that's a problem with transparency on the blockchains, but this allows me to make one of my favorite points. All of these hard challenges, if you just tell the engineers about them, they tend to go off and fix them. So the engineers are not thinking, gosh, this blockchain has a problem with the Bank Secrecy Act. They're thinking this blockchain is efficient and operational and robust and quick and can handle large throughputs and all those sort of engineering challenges. But when we say to them, look, it can't be completely transparent, because that would be a problem for financial regulators, saying you can't just be watching effectively banks transferring funds between each other in the system. So the engineers developed solutions to that, and we now have solutions that mask transactions on a blockchain and avoid the transparency, and all of that stuff just gets fixed. It's been, again, I'm back to the amazing experience of working with engineers. If you tell them what doesn't work, they come back 3 weeks later with another version and that thing's working. So it comes into AI as well now, that AI, I hope, one of the things that it brings is people who aren't engineers or don't have engineering backgrounds work
That are
much
problem
more close.
solvers.
Our problem solvers, yeah. Work more closely with the engineers, and people can get closer to engineering because they can use LLMs for coding or agents to build their code. So everyone can just get a bit closer to these amazing people who are solving problems in the world. And if we're standing closer to them, we would be able to communicate better what our problems are and figure out with them how to fix them.
And on the AI point, very, very neat intro to my next question. You mentioned about crypto and it being more, I guess, popularly used in traditional finance, and you said, oh, I thought this would happen about 10 years ago, and we're still at a point where we're figuring those problems out. And I laughed to myself, because I think that a little bit with AI. Like, I think a lot of people think we're there now. I don't think so, because I'm working with firms that are still doing things on spreadsheets. So I think it's exciting to think about the potential of AI and what it can do and what it can bring. And again, back to your point about experimentation, we're still in that zone too about experimentation. And equally, it brings some certain level of risk, because with AI, differently to kind of the crypto sphere, with AI, it is the traditional finance firms that are using it, and it is retail clients that are at the other end of that. So I think it will be really interesting to see how that progresses, except obviously there's a very popular use case of ChatGPT. So if you want quick emails writing, you're sorted. Which again, I just think that's what a lot of firms are using it for. And so yeah, I just thought, is that kind of what you're seeing in your day to day as well?
Yeah, I probably would have a view on AI and finance that's consistent with all the other things I was saying about where the experiments take place. So one one of the most common experiences I have with AI in the context that that you're talking about is doing similar projects for a bank and a fintech. And fintechs are often founded by engineers, and they almost always have engineers at C-suite level. And banks, obviously, that's not the case. And that then bleeds through into the culture. So the fintechs do have this much more rapid type of culture within limits set by the regulators, whereas the banks tend to be far more conservative about it. I think the example that you give about facing customers is interesting, because it's one of the hard cases that regulators are naturally somewhat uncomfortable with a chatbot, however highly functional it may be, engaging directly with customers without a human in the loop. However, the chatbots are really good at that, because if you're talking to someone in a customer services department, they picked up the phone, they're trying to figure out who you are, what the issue is. It will bring up, you go through security, it brings up your file, and they're sort of seeing, when did you last call? What's the issue? Have you talked about this before? Often that can be people who've not been in the role for long. If they've got a chatbot supporting them, then the bot just reads. It just knows the whole file history in a second, and it's able to surface suggestions. It can read everything about your engagement with the bank, if it's a bank, and it can read every one of the bank's policies that relate to the thing that you're calling about. So I think you do in these kind of retail facing customer service centers, it's a good example of a use case, because the using AI systems generally improves outcomes and customers prefer it. There's different literature on it, but I think that's what I see. But on the other hand, of course, it's a sensitive topic for the regulator. I think with AI generally for everything, it's always faster and cheaper. So you're just left with, is it better? And there's kind of the triangle of faster, cheaper, better. It's the cliche is it's impossible to have all three at the same time, but AI might upturn that. It might be possible to have all three at the same time. I think AI definitely has the capability to do things better, and it's always faster, and it's normally cheaper. So yeah, I'm very bullish about where this takes us over the next few years.
So what should we be looking out for in terms of AI regulation? Like, what are the practical things that firms should be doing now in terms of financial services businesses to either prepare or be mindful of? So including, when you're looking at service providers or SaaS tools, what should people be looking out for? What are the key kind of risky areas?
Yeah, I guess I turn it around to start with, because I think often I get called in and people assume that a lawyer is going to say there is risk here, don't do it. I think
Not you.
exactly, yeah, as a lawyer we need to kind of fight back against that. So we should be trying to help people figure out how they can bring AI inside their environments, because it is possible to do that. And in the context that we're talking now, it's easier for banks to work with AI than lots of kinds of firms, I think. And the reason I think that is, as you say, AI is subject to regulation. It might be like the EU AI Act, which just applies to every kind of AI use anywhere. So whether you're a bank or a shop or anything, you've got the same rules applying. In the UK, I think we will have that in a few years, but currently we have vertical regulation, sector by sector. Now, banks are already regulated. So anything that's maybe a retail firm that hasn't been subject to significant regulation over the years, AI regulation can come as a bit of a shock, because you don't have what I talked about before, this culture of being a regulated firm. So banks win already in that. They understand what it means to be subject to regulation. And then in the UK, the AI regulation is generally quite outcomes focused. So it's difficult for regulators to be prescriptive about what's going on in the box, but they can be prescriptive about it should give the best outcomes for customers. Well, it's interesting because a financial firm in the UK has for a few years now been subject to the Consumer Duty, which is outcomes focused regulation at a financial level. So the if you apply AI regulation to a bank, you often end up with the same answer, which is the AI system needs to be doing the best for the customer. You might get there in a different way, and you would certainly have to do paperwork that would be different from a traditional consumer duty model. But it shouldn't change the way that you are interacting with customers, because it's the outcome that's critical. So I think as much as they might not seem it, banks ought to be able to adopt AI in some ways more comfortably than other organizations, because they can just drop the regulation inside. And to answer your question quickly about what does AI regulation look like, the EU AI Act is the kind of the base case of AI regulation, and it's quite long and it's obviously controversial. It gets called out in political contexts, but it's pretty easy to summarize. So you should be able to identify the AI systems that you're using. You should run a risk classification in relation to each system and each use case, and you should keep records and be able to justify your use of those systems. So there's a lot of detail, but you can summarize the whole act in 20 seconds. And it's difficult to object to that. I think even those people who find the EU AI Act overbearing, I rarely find ones that would say you shouldn't have a record of what systems you're using and have some understanding of how they may cause risk to customers and to the organization. So I think sometimes the debate can get taken over by the politics, and actually the act is there's a question about whether the cost of compliance with all of the detailed record keeping and similar is disproportionate, but at the high level, I think it's hard to find it objectionable on normal corporate governance and customer relations grounds.
And maybe that's the thing, right? Is like you sometimes, I feel like from the perspective of a regulator, perhaps you have to over-regulate just to protect and then see how that goes and then say, actually, this is really not working and the cost of compliance. Because it's very tricky to actually calculate cost of compliance. I mean, they give you that assessment, right? Cost benefit analysis in every single consultation paper. But is that the reality? Probably not. It's a good approximation or best approximation, but you know, the reality probably looks quite different. And I guess to your point, I think in the UK that has been the general view, is that actually do we need better, more robust AI specific regulation when we have operational resilience obligations and other obligations under the regulation that already exist. But I suppose maybe the way that I would phrase the conversation is less even about what the regulation already stipulates, as whether or not we have to kind of approach AI in a slightly different way because it brings about a different risk profile than traditional kind of SaaS systems. So AI enablement almost makes you, it speeds up the process. If you have a breach, it might be really severe all of a sudden because the speed at which things happen is all of a sudden enhanced. And I guess my question to you is what do you think that firms should be training themselves up on, so between now and when we get proper, you know, or more robust regulation that's AI specific, what should firms be training themselves on or their internal staff on to make sure that, you know, at the core the principles apply and can be governed appropriately internally in firms?
Yeah, That's a great question, and I think your framing is exactly right. AI speeds things up, and things can move far beyond a human speed. And so one of the issues I always have talking to regulators, obviously, as we talked about, I've been inside regulators, but I'm normally treated as a subject matter expert. So I normally get to sort of show up, moan about things, and then then walk off and leave the
The
problems
best
behind.
place to be.
Exactly. But I think that is just a fundamental challenge, as you say, that we cannot keep up now with the technologies that we've got available. And that is, in general, I would say a good thing, but it's obvious the risks that come with it. And you say a lot can go wrong in a short time if you've got this kind of superhuman speed technology. So I guess I'd answer the question by saying, we write lots of governance policies, and all of that is kind of fairly straightforward. So having an AI use policy, AI ethics policy, and things like that. I think actually the more interesting stuff is how those things operate in practice, because you know this better than me. Anyone can have a policy, but they could also put it in a drawer and just be, getting on with life. So your job is to make sure that people have the right policy and are putting the policy in place. So I think I might turn this question back to you in a second. But for me, it's how do we ensure that people have got some day-to-day understanding that means that they can confidently use the technologies. There are a bunch of people in financial organizations that have engineering backgrounds and will get on with it, but most people don't. And I think the risk is that we are setting barriers to them using AI. People will somewhat be concerned about using AI. They may think that they might not do it right, or able to check the results, or whatever it may be. Obviously, the flip side is we're always looking out for shadow IT. So I think if ever I'm in a room and I say to a bank, how do people use AI in your organization? And if anyone says to me, AI is banned in my organization, I say, well, that doesn't mean people aren't using it. It means they're using it on their phone, which is far worse than unbanning it and having some systems and
Yeah.
policies. So I think getting into the detail of it and saying, what tools have you got access to? How are they being applied? Do we have ways of escalating risks, of identifying risks, of managing things? So it's kind of doing the hard work that policies tend to sort of skate over. That I think is the more interesting side of it. But ensuring that firms do feel that they can be confident using AI tools. I would generally say to financial firms, I think AI will improve your customer service and your customer outcomes. So unless you can prove me wrong, you ought to be using it. And let's then have the conversation about how you can ensure that your teams are in a position where they feel confident about using it.
Yeah, and I guess in terms of resourcing teams and stuff now as well, there is such a good opportunity to, I guess, have people maybe with different experience and skill sets within teams that maybe are traditionally not looking for people that are tech people or data people. Maybe that's where there's a bit of room to be more creative, and especially in areas like compliance. I mean, I talk about this quite a bit, the benefit of having people that are culturally not necessarily financial services people, because one of the it's both a pro and a con in a way, but the benefit of a compliance function is that you don't actually need to have formal qualifications. Now, of course, there should be formal knowledge and assessment of such knowledge, but what it means is it should be able to attract people from really different backgrounds. And I think what a bonus that is to have a team that's diverse in the ways that they think. And it's not just, the thing is with law, what's great is you've got a baseline, everyone's done the same training. but everyone has to go through that training before and so there's a bit of a toss up, I suppose. Not to say that legal teams can't employ someone outside of that's non-lawyer, but I think it's so great, and similar to your experience, you've got so many things that you're involved with which assists you in being the lawyer that you are, because you get to learn from so many different angles of how to solve a problem. And I guess the other thing I think is really important is that the board get really engaged and involved with this matter. Because unless there's board buy-in, then everyone is just kind of using it in its very base level, which is the way I call it level 1, emails writing, summary papers, that kind of thing. Um, so yeah, I think board buy-in is essential, both to kind of highlight to the board of the potential risks, but also
Yeah.
the opportunities that you can get if you make your workforce a bit more efficient, and the opportunities that exist kind of in that way. I suppose a more philosophical question around AI with the increased use of it. Do you think, I guess, human judgment or human ability to problem solve and critical think, do you think that will trend down?
No, I don't think so. I know, I know that's a contrarian view, so I should explain it. And actually, before I do, I just wanted to echo a couple of your points, because I think you're exactly right in that having teams of people with slightly different skills. I definitely call out your point about the board. I think boards now really should have someone who's got some technical specialism in AI. It is so important, and that is still
100%.
a gap in most places.
100%.
And then you reference it as doing summaries. It's an astonishingly good summarization tool, and generally it's summarizing things for you, the person who would otherwise be reading hundreds of pages and then trying to figure out what memo you're writing. So the ability to use it to support people who we work with, I think it's very obvious, kind of out of the box, that if you're looking at a 100-page financial regulation, the system can summarize it not just one way, but as many ways as you want. It can draw you a picture, it can do your workflow, do you a chart, it can summarize
I
it in
think I
50 words,
do
500
it
words,
a
5,000
hundred
words.
percent, and I do love that functionality, and I wonder whether it's my own kind of human ego that I'm like, if I don't read this whole thing back to back, then I'm going to miss something, or I'm not going to be able to utilize it to the best of my ability in the future. And therefore I still I still, regardless of the fact that I need it to summarize it for me tomorrow for X client and this client another day, and so you can summarize it in different ways because they're all looking for something different out of it.
Yeah.
Me personally, I'll still read the thing back to back regardless.
Yeah, and I think that's important, because the tools aren't infallible, and it means you have the context. It does mean, though, that you're going from producing a memo to reviewing a memo. So you can say to the
100%.
system, you read the document, I'm going to read the document, you do a memo, and then I will work with your memo. And also, in the way that we're saying, you can kind of start again. Like if you have a junior colleague who comes to you with the memo, you send them off on Monday, they come back on Friday. It's got to go out on Friday. Well, they've used 85% of the time because now it's lunchtime on Friday. So you've got to work with whatever they give you. Whereas if you have one of these systems, you can say at any point, actually, let's not do it this way. Let's start with a completely different format and try again, and it will just give it to you. So that, I think, is by way of answering your original question about judgment, that you're the person who's sitting in the driving seat saying, is this the right format? Do I want one twice as long, half as long? Should it be bullets? Should there be some visuals in it? How am I going to get this across to my audience? Where's the judgment that I can operate? And I think that's why I would say it's the opposite. That in my, in an ideal world, yes, there's a person who's got 125% of the time that they need to perform a task with zero distractions. But of course, it's never that. It's 2 o'clock on a Friday. The memo's got to go out before 4, and you've got the memo. You're not kind of spending between 2 and 4 desperately trying to rewrite what the junior colleague has brought to make it, just about good enough. You've got something that's really good, and then you've got 2 hours where you can think and use your judgment and improve it. So I'm optimistic, but I can hopefully I'm not just optimistic, but I can describe to you the basis on which I would be optimistic about that.
That's what brain scientists do say, is if you're interacting with it in the right way, then it's making your brain, it challenges your brain in a similar way as you would if you were just doing things from scratch. But if you're not interacting with it at all, and that's kind of what my fear is with where we're going, is if you're not if you're that junior colleague, you're straight out of uni, you're AI native, that's all you've ever known. And again, maybe it's me looking at it from the perspective of today, this is how, like you have a bit of an ego about the way that you did things 10 years ago. And I was saying to someone the other day that when I was learning, when I was a young little budding compliance person, and we still had to print the SysCam book out,
Mm.
and we still had to highlight, print other policies out to demonstrate we've done it so we could pick up the file, give it to the FCA. I mean, there's no fun in that. There's no value, there isn't any value, but it's just the ego of how we used to do it when we were younger versus now, I suppose, what the reality will be is that people will just be learning how to learn in a different way. And that's probably it.
That's a great point. I love the point about highlighter pens. I think maybe we should, like, to the junior people, we should give them packs of highlighter pens and say, I want
you know
these
what these are.
and they've got to be out of ink in 3 months' time. I can't envisage a world without highlighter pens.
No.
That's got to be a thing.
I guess that's a good point to finish on, highlighter pens. But what we have been doing in this tech mini series is actually the point that we're ending on is actually, what do you think the first AI related enforcement action will be? So I will tell you my other answers once you give me yours.
Enforcement action.
Yes.
Oh, I love this question because I have a ready-made answer and we didn't practice this. So and I have said this to the regulators, I want them to bring an action against a firm for breach of consumer duty because they didn't use AI to do a sufficient whole of market search or sufficiently surface information about the customer.
I love that. We certainly have not received that response yet, so
Right.
that's awesome.
And the regulators
sort of
smile at me. So I think it's not coming out on Monday, but one day. I must be right. The tools are so good at reviewing and managing information that they must produce better results than a person on their own.
Yes, but we need to have the right people that actually encourage that to happen in firms. And I think that's kind of the saddest thing, is that the technology's there. Oftentimes firms have even, invested hundreds of thousands of pounds.
Yeah.
But then they're not utilizing it to the best of their capability, either through, I guess, some level of fear still, but also under-resourcing. And I feel like under-resourcing is a big point, even in traditional technology integration. People think that everything's plug and play. Well, it's not. Kind of need to know how things work. And it's funny because we're building a new platform. I don't think maybe we have discussed that actually. And so many people are like, yeah, I love it because I hate this piece of tech that we have in house and I want to jump ship. I want a brand new shiny toy. And I'm like, okay, well, how much time did you spend integrating it? Are you sure?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things, like when you actually do the comparison, that is the best tool for the job. And they're like, right, okay, so I'm going to do the boring bit. I've got to actually integrate this thing properly. I'm like, yeah.
Yes.
So,
yeah, I think that is one of the things. Like, AI is amazing. I kind of finished where I started, but it isn't magic.
No,
you do
not
have
yet.
to do the work as well. Yeah.
Okay, super. Well, thank you for being on our mini series, and what a fab conversation. I'm sure we'll continue it over a dinner or whatever else that we end up wherever else we end up meeting. The last time was Crypto for Good, actually, right?
That's right. That's
Great
right.
conference.
Yeah. Look forward to
Very
the next one
interesting.
for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We're not